Excuse me.
So welcome back, everybody. So one little announcement I wanted to make is yesterday there was actually a request to have this current Dhamma speaker on the big screen out there, but actually I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep just showing the Zoom grid of everybody virtually joining in, just because based on the technology, and to make a long story short, the speech you hear and what you see on the TV is going to be 2 seconds apart. If I spotlight the speakers, it'll look strange and be a bit confusing. So I'm going to leave it with the Zoom grid view, and then if you'd like to see the speaker more directly, please scooch over and look into the hall. So you can just use this when you're ready after they request the talk. No, just you on. Yeah.
Where's that here?
He'll be here in a minute.
Okay. Like a beam. Maybe Dar, one of the monks.
Does this shape work for you?
No, like a beam.
There's also a bunch in the drawers. Right. And then when you clip it on, the mic can just be about that height, about your heart chakra. Yeah.
It feels a bit very like one of that. Okay.
And we'll wait for Longpor to return before doing the Dhamma Talk request, and also wait for more people to show up, so probably about 5 more minutes. one thing that's interesting with our international audience on Zoom, some people are literally joining in the middle of the night, either from Thailand or Russia, some of these other places. Still joining in.
พรหมจาโลกทีปติสหัมปติกัตตัญชลีอนันทิวรังอยาคตาสันทิตะสัตตาประชักขะจาติกาเทเสตุธัมมังอนุกัมปมังประชัง
นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมาสามิขอโอกาส and with the highest respects to Rinpoche Pasano and Ajahn Kiradamo, Ajahn Yanako, the Sangha, ordained and lay. Good afternoon and welcome. A short while ago, Ajahn Yanako asked me if I would participate in the 9 days of Dhamma that we're having, commemorating the 25th anniversary of Abhayagiri, by giving a talk in the afternoon. So, despite my sabbatical and that I've been largely absent from Abhayagiri for quite a few years up at our branch monastery in the Pacific Northwest. It seemed like the least I could do to celebrate such a historic and auspicious demarcation. The thought of 25 years of Abhayagiri has occurred to me sort of over the years. Never thought it'd be quite like this in a year, quite like we've had. But that's kind of the nature of the mind. As the Buddha says, it's ever other than how we conceive of things. And one of the features that's typical for events like this too is it comes quicker than you quicker than you would have imagined. So just the last day or so, thinking about this gathering that's happening and 25 years of the Abhayagiri, I had a few memories kind of arise in the mind that I haven't really thought of much for a long, long time. One was when I first heard that Lumpur Pasano would be coming to California to help establish this monastery with Thanachan Amaro. And this was like probably one of the top 5 news events of my life. I'll never forget it. I ordained in Thailand at Wat Pah Nanachat with underneath Lumpur Pasano when he was the Jawat or the abbot of Wat Nanachat in those days, and the idea that Lumpur would ever leave Thailand was the furthest thing from our mind. I mean, there was many things that we felt confident about and many things we had doubts about, but one thing we were sure about was Lumpur Pasano's devotion to Lumpur Cha and Dhamma Vinaya and Wapapong, and just the idea that he wouldn't be in Thailand at Wat Nanachat or something never occurred to us. Despite the talks on impermanence and uncertainty, and somehow there was maybe a special category for a thought like that. I had actually been spending some time away from Wat Nanachat at the time, but there was one of the very early disciples of Lumpur Cha, Thanachan Jan, had died. And a year of preparations had been made, much along the lines of what was done for Ajahn Chah. Not quite as grand on a national scale, but in the Ajahn Chah tradition, still a very large and big event. And so many monks were coming from all over the world. And I had been in a branch monastery for, I don't know, maybe 9 months or something at the time, away from Wat Nanachat. And the teacher I was living with had taken me early to help do preparations in this monastery. And since myself and maybe one other monk were the only Farang monks or Western monks there, several days preceding the beginning of the event, we were tasked with setting up the kutis for the senior Farang monks. And so we had done this, and we were on patrol, awaiting the cars to arrive with Lumpur Samedo and Thanachan Pasano and other kind of foreign abbots that were coming to the ceremonies. And we had somebody posted up near the main building, and then we were sort of waiting to sort of receive them, having been trained to be good upataks. And I'll never forget, like, finally we heard word that they had pulled up at the driveway, and the practice is to kind of be right there, and we weren't right there, so we were like trying to sort of dash up this long walkway over towards where the cars were coming, and I remember Ajahn Yatiko had Lumpur Sameto's bags, and someone else had Lumpur's bags, and they were blasting down this path or something, and from maybe 200 yards away, Ajahn Yatiko had this surprised look on his face, and he was like, "Have you heard the news?" And his eyes were like popping out of his head or something, and I was like, "Well, what, you know?" And just as I kind of meet him and sort of grab the bags and stuff like this, he sort of blurts it out. It's like, "Ajahn Pasana's going to California. Ajahn Pasana's leaving." And it truly was a big surprise. And I think it was just slightly prior to that. I mean, I had heard rumors that something would happen in California. And I think maybe it was even around that same time. Ajahn Amro was there and had talked about updates because things were about to start. And I remember one meeting in particular, it was like a optional little session after tea time where Ajahn Amro stayed around and was like showing pictures and this little map and stuff, and several of us were there or something, and Ajahn Pastor was like back in the corner sort of like watching the whole thing, and I thought he was being very kind of skeptical, or because he had this kind of funny look on his face or something. He'd be a good poker player. I mean, you would have never known what was coming. And me and one of my other monk friends, we had kind of good fun sort of proliferating around what a Ajahn Chah Forest Monastery in California would be like. In particular, we spent many hours coming up with what we imagined California English bilingual chanting would be like. Pali English with the California vernacular. Practice would be therapeutic, and the kilesas would be your stuff. And of course, Dukkha was just heavy, man. Which, even at the time, was probably borrowing a little too heavily from the 60s for us. And I remember, I think it was maybe even the next day or something, it was during that stay, I had a chance to talk to Lumpur, and my grandmother had just died around that time, and I had not visited home, although I was very newly ordained. And really my trajectory was spending as much of my life as possible studying in Thailand at the time. I was so in love with the opportunity of finding a place like the Wapapong Sangha. And although part of my mind knew that this was a little foolish, but it's just like it felt like my trajectory was sort of maybe living the rest of my life out in Thailand in these monasteries. And so I wasn't like itching to come, but also like kind of the romance of coming to start anew was a little bit enticing. And I remember talking to Ajahn Pasano or Lumpur and saying, well, it would be good for me to visit my family, and if you need help, maybe I could come. And he was like, well, there's really nothing there. I mean, there's no kutis yet, there's no, and you're just ordained. I said, oh no, I wouldn't care. I'll live under a foot of a tree. I'd love to live in a tent. And he said, no, it's really best for you to just stay here for now and do your training as a Nawaka monk. There's so many good monasteries and good teachers and so much you can learn. And it's probably some of the best advice I ever got in my life, really. And I'm happy he directed me in that way. because just looking back over my monastic life, I'm really happy and fortunate to have had the chance to ordain and train in Thailand. And I think altogether I lived there a little over 6 years. When I first did come to Abhayagiri, it was just a couple years after the monastery started. And my father was sort of in poor health. And Ajahn Jayasaro, who had taken over the role of abbot after Ajahn Pasno left, suggested that it might be good for me to come spend some time here so I could be a little bit closer to my father and my family. The idea wasn't a permanent move, but just why don't you go spend some time with Lumpur Pasno. And that was in 1998. So and I think I arrived almost exactly after the 2-year mark. Mm-hmm. So, and some things had happened, but still not too much. There were people still living in tents, and as excited I was to come back and live here and see what it's like to build a monastery from scratch and help with that as well, because I kind of enormous sort of feeling of gratitude for what was offered in Thailand to me and my peers. You know, these monasteries that had been built and cared for and requisites adequately provided, and just kind of welcomed into a foreign land by foreign people to take up the practice in a way that was so pure, in my mind, correlated even so closely to like what you read in the suttas. The simplicity of the monastery at the time in Thailand and the opportunity to live as a barefoot alms mendicant and carry a alms bowl into local villages and gather alms, and very few duties, so you could really devote yourself to training in Dhamma Vinaya, meditation practice. I remember just feeling what a tremendous gift that was, especially after having lived there for a few years. And the thought of helping contribute to establishing something in America for those who can't make it to Thailand was kind of appealing. Although even at that time, my thought was I'd just spend a little bit of time here. I still was mostly conceiving of spending the rest of my life in Thailand. Arriving, aside from this kind of romantic notion of just a barren patch of land and nothing being here, was actually a little more dispiriting than that. It was something more akin to a Buddhist trailer park. There was like the whole field down here was full of, it looked like a refuge yard or like a rebuild it center or something. There was all kinds of supplies that we inherited with the land, and then some that had been collected. And then there was a bunch of hand-me-down trailers and campers and tents, sheds, and we had one toilet famously for 10 years. And but just even the initial community that was gathering at the time, the lay people and the people coming to ordain, and the quality of teachings, and like the frequency of, I'd say the availability of 2 very high quality, well-trained monastics in Lumpur Pasno and Ajahn Amaro was just exceptional. Like, every day had the opportunity to practice with them and formally and informally receive teachings a couple times a week, and really it's something that's kind of carried on to this day. For those who haven't spent time in other monasteries, it's quite uncommon, the level of Dhamma practice that's kind of done here at Abhayagiri, and just the frequency and the amount of kind of teachings that happen every day, and even comparing to most Thai monasteries in the Ajahn Chah tradition, it's rare to get, in the wintertime, the series of teachings that are done every day. I never really experienced anything like that in Thailand for very long. So it was quite nice to spend time here. It was kind of a difficult part of my life, and I did eventually go back to Thailand for a bit of time, and maybe about 18 months, a year or so after my father passed away. And I met up with Lumpur Pasano on one of his annual trips during that time, and I was in the middle of doing a tudong, kind of wandering around northern Thailand, and I had the chance to pay respects to him. I think it was up in the north. He was up teaching a retreat maybe, and I had a chance to go visit him. And he was telling me about the goings-on, and there had been quite a few monks had gone off here and there to spend time in other monasteries and whatnot. And I remember saying to him, sort of like, wow, it doesn't sound like you have much help. And he says, yeah, maybe a little thin or something. And I said, well, if you ever need my help, I'd be happy to come back. And he says, okay. I mean, you mean right now? And he said, well, no, you can finish your tudong, but maybe, if you want to come back, that would be helpful. And that would have been about 2002, maybe?
Yeah, something like that. You were on your tudong when I got here.
Oh, right.
You got back after I'd been here for 7 months, so you got back in 2002.
That's right, I hadn't met Leaf yet. I hadn't met Anagarika Leaf. I'd heard about him, but I hadn't met him. And so yeah, I came back around that time, and even then I kind of thought, well, maybe I'll spend a couple years here and a couple years in Thailand, but I spent most of the next 12 years here, and got increasingly engaged, helping out with some of the monastery development, and that was difficult. I mean, 25 years on, we're still building the monastery. It's a bit like a cathedral project in medieval Europe. Something that's taking an enormous amount of patience and time and hard work and money. But at 25 years, feels mostly done. And it feels every bit as precious and beautiful as one of those cathedrals. So it's maybe been more expensive and more difficult than other monasteries, but so worth it in so many dimensions. One, it's just an amazing facility, a beautiful monastery, a wonderful community. And, part of the core of the original vision for the place was to establish a place for the Sangha here in America, and for Abhayagiri to be kind of like the head monastery or parent monastery of our tradition, a place where people could come and seek monastic training, draw near monastics, get regular teachings. And that's all happened in just the most perfect and beautiful way. For the time I spent here and gave to that kind of project, that's also turned out to be kind of a substantial blessing in my life. It's like certainly one of the things that I feel a great sense of merit and joy. Just having been kind of part of that process. Maybe not always the most joyous part of that. It certainly came with a certain amount of sort of suffering, but something that really carried me through that was just the quality of being that exists in the teachers here, and also just that thought, like how many people will benefit from having a place like this where there wasn't such an opportunity in the world. Like I remember when I first came across Ajahn Chah tradition, I was in Thailand already. And I think I had like his Buddhist handbook by John Snelling or something. It's like a British author at the time. And he had this little index of Buddhist centers in the back. And I just read one of the early books of Ajahn Sumedho and was quite impressed with it. So I was like flipping through the back of this thing, and then there was like Ajahn Sumedho and the monasteries in England were listed or something. And I got really excited, like, wow, he's from Seattle. And I grew up in Washington State as well. My mom was from that area. And I thought, wow, that's really exciting. And then I was like looking at the list of all the monasteries, and almost all of them were in Europe, except one in New Zealand. And most of them were England. And I thought, well, what good's that? I'm not going to go all the way to England to live with some guy from Seattle to practice Thai Buddhism. Especially since I'm here in Thailand already. And so I ended up shortly after that sort of writing Wat Nanachat and then heading up to Wat Nanachat, which is where I ended up ordaining. So just the kind of thought, both when I was in Thailand, so many times when the weather was too hot, or when you were experiencing less than perfect conditions, even the Thai notion of what constitutes a forest contrasts starkly with my sense of it growing up in the Pacific Northwest. And I would also oftentimes think, God, it'd be a lot nicer to be in a forest in America. There's a lot less disease, there's a lot less noise, there's a lot less creepy, crawly, poisonous things. But at the time, nothing like that existed. And now it does. And not just this monastery, but we have Temple Monastery as another kind of main training center in America. And those two monasteries run pretty close to full, and have since their inception. But at least we have this, and there has been now almost over a generation of monks coming to these monasteries and entering the Sangha, and many have stayed, some haven't, some have moved on to different things. And we still have our first homegrown monk, Ajahn Kridadhammo, who was freshly minted when I arrived in 1998. I think his ordination was maybe like 2 weeks before I came. Visakha Puja, 1998. So they had just had their first ordination. And he was, the monastics were in the minority those days. There's more lay people than monks. And then when I came back from Thailand in 2002, Anakarika Leaf was probably Samanera Yanako already.
Not quite.
Not quite.
I think maybe 3 months after you got back.
Yeah. And one of the things I did when I was here, I was pretty big on the idea that we needed to have more of a presence on the internet. And Ajahn Yanako is what I refer to as our first internet monk. I remember the story right, he was interested in Buddhism, and his dad was aware of Ajahn Chah's teaching, who's here today. And he said, oh, if you're interested in Buddhism, you got to read this. And gave him a book of Ajahn Chah's.
Still Forest Pool. Right.
Still Forest Pool. And then he was thinking he was going to have to go to Thailand, and got online to sort of find some information, and was surprised to find that there was a monastery here in California. And having been raised on the Big Sur coast, in the grander scheme of things, that's still pretty close to your home for
And
Buddhist
that original
monasteries in the West.
website, I believe it was designed by Kondanya.
The original one was, yeah.
And that was the original
Oh, it was.
website. Yeah.
Yeah.
A picture of 4 monks walking.
Oh, the 4
at
monks at Bell Springs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a classic. So, so yeah, 25 years of Abhayagiri. We're still not finished. And in some sense, monasteries kind of never are. But it's kind of off to a good start. And the first generation has been a kind of grand project, very successful. And it's kind of interesting timing with it coming sort of at the end of this kind of year of a 100-year pandemic. And a whole new kind of phase also with Lumpur Pasano sort of stepping back, where not just here at Abhayagiri, but in many of our sanghas, we now have a preponderance of elder experienced monks. And we're kind of entering a whole new phase of trying to learn how to build intergenerational monasteries. And it's kind of exciting to see happening and fun to be part of that experiment, and amazing to see someone like Ajahn Yanako, who started out here, sort of now taking on the leadership role, running the monastery and taking responsibility for training all the new candidates that come here for ordination. So, it's kind of a mark of, kind of a further development of the monastery really taking roots in America. And I remember a long time ago, maybe I think it was Lumpur Pasano was sharing some anecdote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama about when will you know that the Dhamma has really arrived in a new land or something. And one of the comments that he made was like when the Sangha is kind of established, and I forget exactly how he put it, but kind of more in a more indigenous way, rather than monks like Lumpur or even me, who trained somewhere else, ordained somewhere else, and then came here. And the majority of the community now has ordained here under Lumpur Pasano and Ajahn Amaro, and now Ajahn Yanako, and it's pretty much homegrown. In fact, I think when I came, Ajahn Kunadhamma was the only American monk here. And now even Ajahn Pasano is an American monk. Although he still has his Canadian passport. So these are a few kind of thoughts and sharings and stories on this occasion. And often thinking about this monastery and what a rare gift it is, wish to remind all of us, myself included, as well as everyone gathered, just what a rare and precious thing it is. And part of what keeps it that is our dedication and integrity to really making use of it. Like one of my favorite things to reflect on is Buddha said, if you really want to pay homage to me, do the practice. And I think Ajahn Chah sort of at one point said something just along the same lines. Aside from all the buildings and everything that goes on and the events and the ups and downs, the core of what we're here for is to learn about Buddha Dhamma and cultivate the good and learn how to understand and transcend the dukkha that is so possible to do. Maybe not easy, maybe not so straightforward, maybe a great project like building a monastery that takes a great amount of time, but something that is possible. The Buddha's teachings are squarely aimed at the dukkha in our lives that is optional. It can be understood, and the causes and conditions for letting go of that and ceasing the habits of suffering can be developed and realized for the benefit of self and others. And I think that's very much alive here in the Sangha, both the monastic Sangha and the lay Sangha that practices and lives and gathers here. And as we kind of mark the first chapter of this kind of great story, let us kind of reflect on that and rededicate ourselves to everything that entails. I thank Lumpur and Ajahn Amro and Ajahn Krunidhammo and present Sangha, the past Sangha, and the Sangha yet to come. So. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu,
Before I just about to leave, so you can pay respects. Thank you very much. Wonderful reflections. So we can continue sitting for about another 15 minutes until 3, and then that'll be the next period of walking meditation. I'll ring the bell, and it'll be the next period of walking meditation. very beautiful day today. We'll do another forest walk for anybody who's interested, or if anybody would like to keep sitting here or just do walking meditation here in the cloister area, that's fine as well. And for those of you who go on the forest walk, we'll do it just like we did this morning, and because there's no actual turnaround on the trail, go to where I step aside on the side steps trail at a certain point. Everybody passes me, and then I can step back onto the trail. Everyone can do a 180 and then turn around and walk back in the opposite order that you walked out on, and communing with nature as walking meditation. If anybody needs to take a brief break first, we'll meet out and start from the bell tower in about 5 minutes. We'll have a 15-minute break and come back 3:45 for the Q&A session. I think so, yeah. I have to double check. We're muted and I think we're on. Was there something other than printing out the...
Just about to put the last question on the form. And last time I looked, there was nothing in the bowl. I'm going to look at it real quick. And if there's a question in the bowl, I'll just put it on your seat. Okay? I'll just put it next to your seat.
Can we turn down my mic? Then we'll be muted on the YouTube. Okay, welcome to today's Q&A session. There's more than one question today. I have to warn you, I give short answers. Sometimes. A lot of the time. Maybe if we get through them, you could ask if there's still time, you could ask a question in person. How do I put the Four Noble Truths into practice in daily life? This is suffering. This is the cause of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So it's Four Noble Truths is a framework for seeing our own experience. So what we want to do, we want to develop wisdom to have a sense of ease and letting go. And to do that, we have to see the suffering of these different mental obscurations like anger, for example. That's the easiest one to use as an example because it's usually the clearest that when we let it go, there's ease and happiness. So seeing the suffering, seeing the dukkha, seeing the unsatisfactory nature of things, that's the first noble truth. Four noble truths, in order to think about it in a very simple and succinct way, is that the Buddha is just declaring that there is something, and then he's saying this is the cause of it and this is the cessation of it. So it's caused by something and it ceases when those causes are lifted. And the path, we could talk for months about the path, so I won't go into it so much here, but it can be distilled into sila, samadhi, panya, virtue, meditation, and discernment. So the way you put it into practice in daily life is just to see when you suffer. So it's actually too obvious. That's why we don't see it. The reason we're not able to put the Four Noble Truths into practice is it's actually too obvious. So, for example, when we feel a sense of dis-ease or dissatisfaction, habitually we're trying to pin it on something outside of ourselves. So that experience is arising for us, but we're always pinning it on something outside of ourselves, whether it's a friend, family, world, political situation, whatever. We're always pinning it on something outside of ourselves, and that's where the suffering is coming from. That's where our sense of dis-ease and dissatisfaction is coming from. Four Noble Truths, when we learn how to use it in practice, is this is suffering. So we just say, this is suffering. And then the Buddha said that the Buddha radically said that the cause of suffering is tanha, is craving. Kama tanha, bhava tanha, vibhava tanha. So that's craving for sensual, any sense, not just sense pleasure, but craving for the senses to be a certain way. Bhava tanha, craving to like becoming. Vibhava tanha, the craving to not exist, to not be. So those three types of craving, but actually we can just think about it as wanting things to be other than what they are. So that's the easy way to think about it. So say in our daily life we have a sense of dis-ease. And when we see and acknowledge that, then we can say, well, this is because I want something to be other than what it is right now. Things are this way and I don't want it to be this way, but it is this way. So things are this way and I don't want it to be this way. And then when we think about the Buddha, oh wait, that's what the Buddha was teaching. That when you want something, to be different, when you want something not to be that way, it's suffering. So that's how you use the Four Noble Truths in daily life, is you bring it back to your own experience, that it's arising inside, it's not coming from elsewhere. Other things outside might act as corollary causes or side causes, but the experience is arising for us. And so we look at that desire for things to be other than what they are. Can you talk more about the shift from feeling unsafe to feeling safe? So that's like taking refuge. This is one of the questions from online. So refuge is a place of safety. And when we don't yet have that place of safety, we seek it in all sorts of things. And because they're not a true refuge, we don't yet feel safe. So something I was thinking a bit about last night, talking a little bit about taking refuge in awareness. So there's safety in that non-judgmental awareness. That's one. This is actually a difficult question because there's so many causes and conditions that come into play in terms of feeling unsafe. And it's similar to that contemplation of the Four Noble Truths. We might pin our feeling of unsafety on something outside. But actually there's a lot we can do. If there's some sort of situation we're in where we don't feel safe, we can actually set the intention to try and leave that situation or get out of that situation. Setting the intention, setting the motivation to move in a good direction is very, very important. And it all comes back to dukkha and the unsatisfactory nature of existence in general. So, say during the whole last year with the pandemic, people might feel very unsafe, or people might express that they feel unsafe. And this is just, if it's not one thing, it's another. So even outside of this particular strange time in history, people get various illnesses or have accidents, and there's always tragedies happening. Sandra actually came up with some words of wisdom a couple days ago when she was showing her brother-in-law here at the monastery, and we were talking about the fires, how they have these fires locally, and Sandra said it. Being alive has many inherent risks. Just being alive has many inherent risks. And so if we aren't able to come back to taking refuge in something stable, like knowing and awareness, then it is risky. It's risky to take refuge elsewhere. That can lead to a place of like a feeling of safety. So in the shift of feeling unsafe to safe, it's like shifting refuges from something that's unstable, like something outside of ourselves that we can't control, to something stable like awareness, which is always there, always accessible. When living with others, we tend to stick with our perceptions, our belief, causing potential conflict with them. In our practices, how can we accept others as they are and be able to live with others harmoniously? This is like monk friend of mine, Ajahn, an abbot in Thailand, Ajahn Achalo, he translates metta as non-judgmental awareness. So I really like that translation, that non-judgmental awareness, accepting people as they are. And this is a good question, because with our perceptions, sometimes we underestimate how powerful perception can be. When we meet somebody else, we're not actually meeting them, we're meeting a perception of them. So we may even meet somebody for the first time, and we already might have a perception of them based on something they've said, or it could be even something really small, and we develop a perception of someone. And then when we talk to them, we're talking to our perception, we're not talking to them directly. Or when these perceptions, this edifice of perception, that we start to dismantle it with knowing and awareness. So non-judgmental awareness is a great way to have goodwill, and people will feel that. So a lot of times, young people in America will feel comfortable around someone because they'll say, it's because I feel like they're not judging me. So I feel like they're not judging me. Or I don't feel judged when I'm around that person. So it's not uncommon that you hear young people say that. And usually that person will have a sense of non-judgmental awareness, just accepting them as they are. That also leads to that feeling of safety, creating that feeling of safety for others. That's an act of generosity. Non-judgmental awareness is abhayadana. That's the gift of fearlessness, gift of safety. How should a person cope with loneliness or fight the feeling of being lonely without having to rely on other things / people / contact / sensation? Thank you. Yeah, loneliness is an interesting one. I'm not sure if what's exactly meant by fight the feeling of loneliness. You can be aware of it. You can be aware of the feeling of loneliness, just like being aware of any other feeling. Loneliness is interesting because it's not necessarily associated with being alone. So people might have the experience of being alone and they don't feel lonely. They feel held or full or fulfilled. Or you might have the experience of being at a big party or gathering and you feel more lonely than ever. So I think of loneliness as alienation, like a sense of alienation. That's very much connected with loneliness. And I remember just being in a cave in Thailand, just on retreat, and I remember at the end of the retreat reflecting that I never once felt lonely while I was in this cave, and just doing the practice and feeling very whole and feeling quite good about the practice, but not feeling lonely, but being in a very lonely, what people would consider a very, very lonely place. And people were actually bringing food to me. I wasn't even going down. The other monks were bringing food up, and there was a bell outside of the cave, and the bell would ring, and I would just go out, and since it was a bhikkhu bringing it up, it would already be offered. So I wasn't even going down. This was at Pujamgam, not even going down for the alms round for 2 weeks. And so if you think of the opposite of loneliness, there's that feeling of being held. So I felt very like being held by the environment there, and it was this very beautiful natural environment, very good weather at the time, not too hot, not too cold, feeling very comfortable. But then sometimes the loneliness can arise really strong, like depending on our temperament. It could be when we're in the city or when we're around a lot of people, then we might feel unsafe. Or all these questions are connected because there's loneliness is also that feeling of not feeling safe. But sometimes loneliness is because we're by ourselves or we're missing people. We want to hang out with our friends or whatever, and we're lonely, so we call our friend up, hey, let's go hang out. But that doesn't really get at the heart of the problem. So go hang out, go watch a movie or something. It might alleviate it for a while just by not looking at it with awareness. But to really get to the heart of the problem, we look at it with awareness and try to see what's the deeper issue here and trying to get to the heart of the problem. But we don't really have to fight with it. That's more like repression. We don't want to repress or deny what we're experiencing. So we want to see it with awareness, see it with mindfulness and awareness. Buddhism is all about seeing everything with mindfulness and awareness and looking at what's it stemming from, what's it coming from. So it's not about getting rid of it. It's just acknowledging this is the way things are, this is how it is right now, and it's unpleasant, and looking at how it is. And that's what we call the contemplative practice as well, when we just look at it and see our awareness is just like this, and in this moment it can't be any other way. Seeing it with awareness does start to change it. It's one of those practice paradoxes where seeing it with awareness and non-judgmental awareness, it does actually start to change it. It starts to calm down, it starts to settle. What is the attitude to have to others who are not on the path but are close family members? They might be on the path, you never know. Non-judgmental awareness. Yeah, also just, that's how we, if we talk about bringing people to the path, all it means is bringing them to a sense of contentment and well-being and awareness, and through that non-judgmental awareness of others is really what sets that example. So if we express something like frustration, they're going to end up thinking, well, I think I'm not so sure about that, if I want to emulate that. But if they see you coming at like with non-judgmental awareness and just being respectful, supportive, respect is a big one. That's the karawa in Pali. Karawa is respect. So that's a very important quality to be cultivating. Humility, respect, and seeing good qualities in others that, even though they may not, quote unquote, be on the path, they may have actually good qualities that are path-like that we can take note of. Can you speak about how to hold both appreciation and gratitude and not lose an awareness of dukkha and understanding of dukkha? Yeah, awareness of dukkha doesn't necessarily mean we have to be suffering all the time. So, appreciation and gratitude, these are things that naturally arise. If we talk about the course of the practice and how the practice opens up and develops for us, then it's only natural that we'll have a sense of appreciation and gratitude. And having appreciation and gratitude, and say, those are bright qualities, so it's okay to be in brightness. It's okay for the mind to be bright and to abide in that. So we don't have to always be contemplating dukkha, we can also be contemplating cessation of dukkha. So we can say, well, that's interesting, these qualities are non-dukkha, these qualities are bright, and there's contentment and brightness, and so that's the third noble truth. So we don't always just focus on the first noble truth, but we also focus on the third noble truth, the cessation of dukkha. And so then when dukkha does arise again later on, we say, oh, well, why is dukkha arising? Well, maybe it's because those qualities of appreciation and gratitude aren't present. So then we try to cultivate those qualities of appreciation and gratitude again, because the goal is to stop suffering. That's the ultimate goal, is to find a way to the remainderless cessation of suffering, what we call nibbana. So it's not just being aware of it, but it's being aware of dukkha in a way that does lead to the settling of the mind. When, quote, returning to the knowing, unquote, was described as aware, awake, and bright, I understand the aware and awake, but is the brightness something that comes up naturally because lack of kilesas, or something that the mind is lifted to? Yes. So I guess you could just say yes to both. When the mind transforms or the mind gets bright, there's a lack of defilements, and also the mind can be lifted up above, out of the muck of the defilements, so that it doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. It's when the mind becomes bright, it doesn't really matter how it became bright. Just that it's bright, and then we'll see that, say, using the example of anger, I had this experience one time where I was actually irritated and angry and was able to really let go of it, really saw the suffering of it in that moment and was able to let go of it, and suddenly felt very, very happy. And the mind got bright temporarily. And so can't really say it was either lifted up or lack of kilesas. It's kind of both. Lack of kilesas keep it weighed down, keep it heavy, and so it's natural that it's buoyed up or gets lifted up at that moment of brightness. Sadhu, Longpo and Ajahns, for all your teachings in the verses of sharing an aspiration. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. What are the threefold bliss? That's a good one. That's a academic question that's very good to know, because we just say the threefold bliss, we never really explain it. And that's I believe it's the bliss of good health, so the bliss of health, the bliss of happiness, and the bliss of nibbana. Is that right?
There's probably all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it's like happiness of the world, as well as a heavenly happiness, and then the happiness and bliss of Nibbana.
Worldly happiness, heavenly happiness, and bliss of Nibbana. Yeah. I know in Thai they call it lon, sam lon, and I remember I think that's where I got the health one, was prapayuto. So it could be either of those, the worldly happiness, heavenly happiness, and the bliss of Nibbana, or it could be good health, or just all types of happiness. So threefold, meaning just everything, all types of happiness. Could you suggest some inquiry questions to contemplate in investigating and realizing the wisdom practice of equanimity? Equanimity, traditionally, it's normally cultivated by the contemplation of kamma. So it's the traditional phrase is, I'm the owner of my kamma, heir to my kamma, born of my kamma, related to my kamma, abides supported by my kamma, whatever kamma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. And then we apply it to others as well. Others are heirs of their kamma, born of their kamma, related to their kamma, abide supported by their kamma, whatever kamma they will do, for good or for ill, of that they will be the heir. Kamma being action, just actions of body, speech, and mind. And that's traditionally how you cultivate equanimity. So if you want to have inquiry questions, or you could have something like, how am I the owner of my kamma? What does that mean? Looking into that. Also, coming back to that non-judgmental awareness, like if we think critically of somebody, like asking ourselves, what do I gain? What do I gain from thinking in that way? So it's trying to use those Four Noble Truths, trying to see dukkha. What do I gain from being judgmental of this person? What do I gain from being critical of this person? And inquiring in that way can lead to a sense of equanimity and cooling the mind down. You got a question?
More academic. This is the celebration of the 25th anniversary of Abhayagiri, right? And I think it was collective mentioning that when we never thought it's going to be, or intended to be this what we have now over 25 years. So anyway, my question would be that for the next 25 years, what would be the leading light of the direction of Abhayagiri? You probably might say the Dhamma, but you have is there any collective vision of what?
I think this was the vision. I think they've very much achieved the vision. I think.
And the next 25 years, what would it be like?
Build some more tent platforms. Own the whole valley of an empire. It's hard to say. I mean, we're in phase 3 of our 4-phase construction, so there's this building was the building that had to be completed to get out of phase 2. And phase 3 has there's only one more large building planned for the monastery, and that's the Uposada Hall, and that's supposed to be up the hill, but we don't really have a timeline for that. Or we've started thinking about it a little bit, but in terms of building, that's, as the community grows, we do need a bigger ordination hall or ordination area, and add that to the monastic area. Otherwise, there's just maybe 6 or 7 more kutis planned, and that's about it.
Yeah, that could take another 25 years.
It could. A chetty maybe or something. But the Uposada Hall might actually be the chetty as well. So sometimes like combining things together. And otherwise it's just the whole giving the opportunity for people to ordain and live here and then maintaining everything. It's work to just maintain everything and make sure it doesn't degenerate too much. And we have kept building. We just built this new 4-room dormitory called the Brahma Vihara, just up the hill that people are now occupying. So that was just completed. And we're replacing there's the 5 original kutis that Luang Por mentioned yesterday. It's these 5 original kutis. They were meant to just be temporary for a few years, and they're 24 years old now. So we replaced 1, we replaced the log cabin, but we have to replace the other 4. And that's where Ben was staying, was in the log cabin replacement. We call it the Parami Kuti. Turned out to be a very good kuti. Yeah, and there's always going to be little things that happen, like this man wanted to build a pavilion for our little Earth Store Bodhisattva statue, and so that was just done. But yeah, just take it as it comes. And, keep the precepts and just continue on. Or maybe it'll all burn down. And then we have to spend 25 more years rebuilding it. Okay, so, one more question, yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
What would you recommend I could do to help myself fear death less?
Yeah, that's also so the question being to fear death less, what can be done? Yeah, just according to the Buddha's teachings, usually to fear death less, we talk about virtue, or what we call sila, and sila being the greatest protection, because in terms of death, there's an intuitive fear that we have about death. So there's, like we might have regret or we might have remorse. So the Buddha's recognizing that and saying, well, the best way to die is to die without regrets. And so to be living our life in a way that we don't have regret and remorse, setting that intention to live in a way that's upright with a lot of integrity, and that actually can help quite a bit. According to the scriptures, someone who's attained the first stage of awakening, the stream entry, that first stage of insight where you see impermanence very, very clearly. You see that the body and the mind is itself, impermanence, and that deep insight into impermanence, they say that the fear of death falls away at that time, when one sees very, very clearly into impermanence or the unsatisfactory nature of the human condition. But that's also very conceptual, so like we usually take it back to virtue and integrity, and then living in that way can actually help quite a bit. Death contemplation is a very big contemplation in Buddhism. But we don't want to do death contemplation to the point where we feel really afraid or morose. That's not the aim of it. The aim of it is to bring us back into the present and not be lost too much in the future or proliferating about the past either. So the death contemplation is for bringing us back into the present, to that present moment awareness. But yeah, usually just that focus on honesty as well, honesty, integrity. That I don't know if Lumpur has anything to say about that as well. We've got a few more minutes.
I don't actually have much more to say because that's a really it's a really important sort of perspective to recognize, is that so much of our say fear of death, worry about death is around what have I left incomplete, or what have I not got? What am I missing? And then that ability to return to the recollection that actually I've lived really skillfully. I don't have remorse. I don't have regret. I don't have an over inflated expectation of anything. So it's also that's that seeing things clearly, and particularly seeing that so much of our dissatisfaction or fear comes from trying to get or trying to be what we aren't, and as that's seen more clearly, then there isn't really a basis for fear or worry, and then also that aspect of what Ajahn Yaniko referred to as that initial liberating insight into Dhamma is also the insight into personality and identity. When we see that all of the things that we build our personal identity with are all impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self, then there's a great relief where the burden of trying to prop up an identity in one way, shape, or form, or trying to run away from a particular identity in one way, shape, or form, those are all constructs that don't really have any substance to them. So then when that's seen, then you realize, there's nothing to fear, and there's an ease and a well-being and kindness and compassion that we can take as a bottom line rather than fear and worry.
So we'll end with, we have a chant, a closing chant at page 33 of Chanting Book 1. It's the verses of sharing and aspiration. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled. Okay, and I have a couple announcements also before we disperse. And one is there's a commemorative book which was printed just for this occasion, Nourishing the Roots, and there's a stack of them just outside, so if people are coming for the day, want to have a copy of that, then that's available. It's a brand new book of some teachings of Luangpur Pasano, just printed just for this occasion. We literally got them yesterday from the printer, so it's pretty good timing. Also, tomorrow at 1 p.m., Ajahn Amaro has agreed to give a Dhamma talk. So Ajahn Amaro that's one of the wonderful and marvelous things about Zoom. We can highlight a Zoom window of Ajahn Amaro and have him give a talk. And so we'll see if the technology devas have compassion on us and it works. We're going to do our best to make that work. And that'll be, you can join in via Zoom or YouTube. Should also be on the YouTube, 1 p.m. the afternoon, the day 3 afternoon session, which will be on the Abhayagiri YouTube channel page as a live thing. Is anything else? Can't think of anything else. Okay, so we'll pay respects to the shrine and we'll end it. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. I render homage to the Buddha.
the Blessed One. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammang namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho, the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sanghang namami, I bow to the Sangha.
Okay.